Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds, a follow-up edition with comics creator Joe Eisma. Joe was on a couple of months back and was making some references to work to come, and one of those projects has come to be, I believe, the last issue of Star Trek Holo-Ween. I think that comes out this next week, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So a wonderful four-issue miniseries, and I'm just going to spell that one more time, Halloween, as in Holo Ween. So love that. Joe, thanks for jumping back on for a few minutes and talking with me today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite back.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anytime, anytime. So curious about your history with the world of Trek. Was this a new journey for you, or are you a longtime Trekker?
Long time. Like my late father was a big Star Trek nerd.
Hmm.
Um, and I came to it early. Like my earliest, I was thinking about this when you initially asked the question or whatever. What my earliest Star Trek memory was, and like it's funny to me now, but like my mom, because I grew up in the 80s, she took me to see Wrath of Khan in the
Hmm.
theater.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
was like really young, I think it came out in what, 82 or something like that. Maybe
That
I was like
sounds about
4 or 5 years old or whatever.
yeah.
And the scene where they're putting the worms in Chekhov's ears and everything, I freaked the hell out and I started screaming. And my poor mom had to like rush me out of the theater. So it was pretty traumatic, but I was still just super fascinated with Star Trek. So like, we didn't have internet back then. We had like TV and like, Star Trek was on because it was on syndication or whatever. So I
Hmm.
would see all the classic episodes. We had HBO, so I would see all the movies. I was really a TOS fan, like through and through. Just loved the original cast. And but when Next Gen came out, like I remember being like really a lot of those like kind of stereotypical nerds, like not gonna do this. This is gonna be worse. This is gonna be inferior. Like they
Right, right.
can't just like replace the cast. So like I scoffed at it. But my dad, and he was always so much more open-minded. He's like, well, let's just watch some episodes to see what it's like. And he just loved it. I mean, he would record the episodes on the VHS tapes and just watch them over and over. And so
Hmm.
we would always have Star Trek. So I totally got into that with him, while it was on, and kind of fell out after Next Gen, ended their initial run, but kind of came back right around like the time like Netflix started doing more of the streaming because like I missed Deep Space Nine when it was on and Voyager. And boy, I plowed through Deep Space Nine. That was like my favorite for like the longest time. I love that cast. I love the story, the setting. I was initially like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but like it turned out to be like probably like my favorite up until that time, my favorite Star Trek
Hmm. Hmm.
that I'd ever seen. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a constant factor in my life, but I was always, I have to say, a little bit more of a Star Wars guy.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but just because, like, what kid doesn't want to run around with a laser sword and be the hero? It's like Star Trek's a lot more science based and a little bit more methodical, a little bit, and it has the military aspect too, which is cool.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you can't really run around with, a pretend phaser. It doesn't look as cool as a lightsaber. But yeah, I mean, just a constant presence throughout my life. So I'll always be like that's like they're pretty close in terms of like my fandom, like Star Trek and Star Wars. But yeah, so Star Trek's always just really like kind of dear to my heart because of the fact that it was my dad's like favorite, kind of nerdy franchise. And so like that's the thing that like made it so special for me to start working on this because I'd done a few little Star Trek things in the last year or so. I did a Picard story for
Hmm.
Star Trek 400, and then I did a fill-in on the main series. Those are great, but this was just an opportunity to work within that specific time frame, the next generation. And to me, that made it so much more special because like it's one of those things like I know my dad would have been so proud, and he would have been
Yeah.
so excited to see this. So that made it all the more special. So,
That's awesome. That is
yeah.
awesome. Yeah. And it's often said to be like this optimistic vision of the future. And
Hmm.
As a kid, you get to kind of play diplomat if you're going to be a Star
right?
Trek fan. So yeah, yeah, lots there to appreciate. And I'm with you. I'm sort of like Star Trek, Star Wars are right there for me.
Hmm.
And this particular story, the Holo-Ween story, is a
Hmm.
really fun take.
Yeah.
It's I want to say as much fun, at least as much fun as the musical episode of Strange New Worlds, which I know is probably
Well, thank
one of
you.
those like debatables among fans, but
Yeah.
I had a good time with that too.
Yeah.
So lots of fun, lots of invention. What was the collaboration like on this for you?
Well, it was a lot of it was a challenge, not in a bad way. Because like every project I work on is different. I think about this a lot. I was really reflective about this because last week was New York Comic Con and
Mhm.
connecting with people that I've worked with and potentially going to work with in the next year or so. And just thinking about like the different types of writers that I've worked with, the different styles. Like Morning Glories is gonna go down, at least for me, like is like one of my all-time collaborations. I mean, I know it's like one of my all-time most, beloved works for fans or whatever, but like for me too, like the synergy that Nick and I had, like, it's almost like he wrote pretty detailed scripts, but they weren't like overly like they weren't too controlling, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
um Chris Sakaria, his script here for Holo-Ween, very detailed, like probably the most detailed script I've ever gotten. Like, I've read stories about like Alan Moore scripts and Chris Claremont scripts about like their each page description is almost like a chapter of a novel. So like and I'm not saying this to not Chris, but I mean like it was pretty much like that. His script
Mhm.
was some of the most like uh verbose, and I know verbose kind of has negative connotations, but like I could just tell like how passionate he was with this story, and like uh it was just his enthusiasm in his script definitely, I hope, kind of fed into my art. So he was really very easy to work with. And a lot of writers don't do this either. Like a lot of times when they write a script, they'll break it down like for panels or whatever, or they'll do the Marvel style and just let you decide on that stuff. But Chris would include little thumbnails of how he thought the panel layouts should work. And I remember my initial impression, I was like, who does this guy think he is? Like, that's my job. But um, in terms of the storytelling for his script, like he wasn't like you have to use these. These are just my suggestions.
Uh-huh.
And I had to say for a lot of the book, like I used his suggestions because it worked best for how he had his script, broken down.
Mhm.
And so it was like that was the first for me. I've never had another writer do that for me. Well, I might have had like one kind of pencil in one. Like, I think there was one I was working on, Death of Nancy Drew, Anthony Del Colo. Like, there was a double page spread. It was a little I couldn't quite understand like what he was describing in the script. And so he did helpfully draw me out a diagram, and that helped. So
Mhm.
Chris, was really good about that. And he was very, open to suggestion if I wanted to change like an angle or something. It was great. And then I have to give major credit to Heather Antos and Vanessa Real, are the editors on this book. I mean, they're so encouraging, and they definitely helped like me be the best storyteller that I could be for this, because it's a lot. And I think about like artists when I read interviews with them and how they're like they don't want to do team books because it's a huge cast, and like I definitely felt that when I
Mhm.
started this, because this series is weekly. It's coming out weekly in October to capitalize on Halloween.
Mhm.
And so we started well in advance, but I definitely had deadlines I had to hit because the colorist has got to color it, it's got to get lettered, and has to go to Paramount for like revisions and stuff. But managing that cast, because it's a huge cast for next gen. I was like, by the time it was done, I was very grateful to be done. I enjoyed it, but I was like, that's a lot of people.
Right, right.
um, so that was probably, like I said, like this was a more challenging project for me than I've had probably recently, but not in a bad way. Like it's good to kind of like, I think it helps you grow as an artist and a storyteller to do these types of things. And it is fun for me to like figure out like how to like get these iconic characters to act on the page and to
Mhm.
kind of contribute to that franchise and to the lore. And so like that is always like super exciting. And anytime that I was ever stressed about like having to draw seven, cast members on a page. I was sitting there and like reassuring myself. I'm thinking like, but this is like a legendary, property.
Right.
And these are legendary characters, and I get to contribute to that. So it was great. Like I said, it was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun. And the concept, like I was telling you before we started recording, like I can't believe no one thought of this before.
Hmm.
Holodeck, like why not Holo-Ween?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was very excited when I saw it, and I knew I was in for a good time.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Good.
Um, And so you were talking about the cast, so that kind of
Mhm.
leads to the next question. I've had
Mhm.
Gordon Purcell on before talking about,
Oh yeah.
like trying to capture likenesses. So what was that
Mhm.
process like? And thinking especially about Brent Spiner and Data here
Oh
in
yeah.
particular, because there's some really interesting and fun things that happen with his character in this
Yeah.
story. So curious about that process of capturing what these people look like.
Well, I definitely had lots of tabs on my web browser for all the cast. And like, thank goodness we have Google. Because like I was in the thing like Gordon, somebody like who drew the Star Trek comics in like the 80s and the 90s. Like, how did they do it? Like, I still don't
Hmm.
understand. Like, I guess maybe like have to draw next to the TV or something, like be able to
Hmm.
get the likeness. Because yeah, it was really stressful. That's really like again, that's part of the challenge. That was like I can't lie. That was like a major part of the stress for this book was getting the likenesses. And thankfully, I didn't miss a lot of the likenesses according to Paramount. Like I got a few, uh, retouches. Like try again with this likeness, but it wasn't bad.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
that's my anxiety. I'm thinking, oh God, this is gonna be so difficult because like there's seven main characters or whatever, and they all have like the fans like really want them to look like who they're supposed to be, and if you
Hmm.
don't do it, then they're like they just rake you over the coals. But yeah, so I had lots of tabs open with various images. I had my iPad in front of my computer. I would be streaming next generation episodes while I was drawing, and sometimes I would stop the iPad at a certain shot or whatever so I could draw that face. So yeah, keeping lots and lots of visual reference open while I was drawing was like key. I don't think I would have been. I'm obviously can't just pull this off without looking at the actor or whatever.
Hmm.
You have to have some reference. So yeah, reference is king. And any artist who like I don't know what the deal is with people who say that like artists shouldn't use reference because especially on a licensed property like this, when the intellectual property holder like Paramount and the fans, they really they know who these characters are and they want them to look like those characters.
Hmm.
So you gotta do your best to line up with that. So yeah, it was a little bit stressful, but in the end, I'm happy to have done stuff like that, and it helps you also grow as an artist to like capturing likenesses and uh, my wife, she loves it when I draw her, and I don't. She always like pushes me to like do more sketches of her, and I'm like, I've drawn all day. But what she always tells me that I always take to heart that always makes me feel good is like the thing about she always tells me like when I do draw her or our family or people that we know, she's like, you always do a good job like capturing their personality. And that's to me like if you can't always nail the physical stuff because you can literally just trace a photo of an actor or whatever, and I feel like that's lifeless. So I feel like the real work comes in capturing who the essence of that character is, their expressions and how they would hold themselves. And so, yeah, like somebody like Data, there is a lot of stuff that happens to Data in this book, but like at the end of the day, like I still want you to be able to see Data, not just on his face, but I want you to see it like in his mannerisms and his stature, his posture. So that was really the hard work that I put into this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it came through well. It
Well,
came
thank
through
you.
very well. Absolutely. So by means of a last question, and we can hit
Mhm.
anything else along the way that you'd like to mention. I always like to ask about what's in progress, what's in
Mhm.
development,
Mhm.
and that could be anything from I know this is going to happen and it's been
Mhm.
announced to there's this hush hush thing that might
Yeah.
happen that I can't talk about. So I know that there are varying
Yeah.
levels of that, but I do
Sure.
want to give you the space to mention anything.
Well, I thank you.
Hmm.
I have there was a series I did over the last year called Blood Oath that came out digitally on Comixology. It's finally available in print, I think, starting in January or February. Dark Horse is putting it out as a trade paperback.
Hmm.
So I'm really excited about that because that was a really fun series. And it was actually the first time I worked with Heather Antos, who is the Star Trek editor. And I think that's kind of like what helped catapult me over to the Star Trek franchise because Heather and I enjoyed working together. So it'll be nice to have that in print. That'll be, I think that may be possibly my only release for 2024 because the other stuff that I'm working on two projects for Mad Cave and
Hmm.
Maverick. I'm working one for Mad Cave for their imprint, and then for their Maverick imprint, which is their young adult graphic novel line. The Mad Cave one, we haven't started production on it yet, and that one I'm real excited about. That one, that one is a horror romance story.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
so I've never done anything like it, and I've never read anything like it. Again, I'm not trying to be like all hoity-toity, like I'm trailblazing here, but like that's what attracted me initially to this particular script was that it was the same thing that attracted me to Morning Glories. I was like, I'm not seeing anything like this,
Hmm.
and that excites me as an artist. So that should hopefully be 2025, I'm guessing. But the one I'm working on at the moment, they had they haven't announced the title of it yet, but it's with Lila Sturgis and Dave Justice, who have worked on the Fables franchise.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Lila's worked on Lumberjanes. I've known them going back like 14 years. And we've tried many times to collaborate on something. They did a book called Public Relations at Devil's Due. And I drew the first issue of the second arc, and then the funding ran out from the publisher. And so we have this entire issue, and it's just we can't do anything with it. So that's kind of a drag. And we've tried other pitches, other places haven't connected. And then this particular one, I'm super excited about this. Again, I hate to keep jumping back to Morning Glories, but I think about I was because again, like I said, I was kind of being reflective after New York Comic Con. I was
Hmm.
trying to think about like my place in this industry, having been in it for 15 something years or whatever, and like remembering, that spark that got me excited. And thinking about, again, like Morning Glories when I first read Nick's first issue script and just how electrifying that was. And I got the same vibe from Lila and Dave's pitch, and they were so nervous to send it to me because they're like, "This takes place in a school." And like, I don't know if you want to draw this because you're always complaining about being typecast or whatever. And I'm like, let me read it, and it was some of the most inventive like storytelling I've read in a long time. It's set at a university in Rhode Island, and it's kind of like an Ivy League school, so it's college age, so it won't be high school kids. So at least there's that difference, I guess.
Hmm.
And it's about just this group of four students, and I really don't know how much I can say, but I will say that it is really has a big emphasis on comedy, which is an area that I love and I don't get to do a lot of.
Hmm.
I fought for that through all my career to do comedic books. I've succeeded a few times. I did Charlie's Angels with John Layman, and that was like
Hmm.
some of the funniest stuff that I've drawn. I always tried to work humor into Morning Glories, even though Morning Glories is kind of mean spirited humor, if there's humor in it. But this one is literally some of the most hilarious, like, uh, storytelling I've seen in a comic, and I can't wait to. I mean, it's one of those things like I'm looking forward every day to like the page that I have on my plate and like using my storytelling skills to like really push humor because that's really where my passion is like because I love exaggeration and gesture within art, and so like to be able to kind of utilize that skill set in this book is something I'm really excited about. And hopefully like this is going to be like a 180-page book. I'm only drawing like 20 pages of it. So
Hmm.
we got a ways to go. So hopefully we're wanting that it to be out by the end of 2024, but the thing we can't ever count on is like printers.
Hmm.
Because of the pandemic, a lot of publishers are struggling to find printers that will print books like on in certain times, and so you have to have them done at a certain point in order to be on the list at the printer. So they were kind of like probably 2025. So we'll see. But I'm really excited about this one. And this is the young adult market is something I've been wanting to get into for a long time in terms of a creator. So I'll be excited to have that kind of full story, that book on the shelves. And this is something that my oldest kid, who's 15, that he could read, and I think he
Hmm.
would enjoy. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate what Mad Cave does, and I
Mhm.
appreciate that they have an entire subdivision, Maverick. And
Mhm.
I'm a high school English teacher, so I always
Yeah,
appreciate when books are marketed toward that audience, and I'm like,
yeah,
yes, I can put this on my shelf. And it sounds
yeah,
like a great collaborative team as well,
yeah, yeah. And this
between
would be
you
one
and
too because
Lila and
it's
Dave.
not like I don't think there's nothing in here that would be kind of offensive. There's not like gore. There's no sex scenes or anything like that. There's nothing like it's definitely suited for that audience, and it doesn't like I don't think promote anything any like
Hmm.
bad behavior. Not that I'm not trying to talk trash about Morning Glories either, but like when because I teach too sometimes, and I did a period where I taught high school and junior high kids art,
Hmm.
and the school that I was at, they encouraged me to like, show my work and stuff. I was like, I don't really have this is like before Archie even. I was like, I don't
Hmm.
really have anything that I could put on the shelf in my classroom. So
Hmm. Hmm.
it's the same thing like with Morning Glories. Like I'm super proud of it, but I'm like, I don't know if I want a junior high kid reading it. So
Right, right.
yeah.
Well, and that's the flexibility of the medium and
Yeah.
nice flexibility of what you do too. So,
Yeah.
but very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like wonderful things on the way. And I'll
Hopefully.
mention one more time. I hope folks check out Holo-Ween and enjoy it because it is a lot of fun and fun for a Trek fan as well as somebody that's kind of just familiar at the fringes that wants a good fun story.
Yeah.
Anything that we've missed in the talk through that you want to make sure to mention?
Well, I'll just say this about Halloween. One of the things that attracted me to the project was the fact that, it was a lot of the um, aspects of the story, led to kind of tributes to the quote Universal monsters.
Hmm.
It's really funny to me, and I mentioned this because I was on the panel and at New York Comic Con was uh, the Universal who owns the rights to those Universal monsters, right? They're pretty litigious. So
Hmm.
that was one thing. Like when I did my initial designs for some of the characters to take on some of those attributes, they're like, yeah, that looks a little too much like the creature from the Black Lagoon. We don't want to get
Uh-huh.
sued, so
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
maybe change it just a little bit. So that was kind of fun. That was kind of a challenge too, that aspect. But it was fun. It's funny to me to think about it that way. Like, we all kind of know what these are all based on, but we can't say what they're based on.
Right, right. Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, and
yeah,
who owns Frankenstein? Really? At this
yeah,
point,
right,
like it's
yeah,
Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley
yeah,
owns Frankenstein.
right.
Yeah. So awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you, Joe, for another wonderful talk, and glad to have
My
you back
pleasure.
anytime. Glad to have you back for a Mad Cave Maverick
Yeah,
exploration at some point with Lila and Dave if they're into
well, that'd
it.
be
And
awesome.
yeah, yeah, that would be
Yeah,
great. So wishing you much creating to come, and thanks again for the time and for the work.
thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.